Well, hello. I'm taping session 2 of conflict management, and I trust that you learned something from session 1 and it was beneficial to you, and I'm sure it was. Hopefully, you're understanding some things and learning some things that are going to help you at home and in at your job and in ministry. And so, let me just begin by updating a few things that we ended with last week. And let me say this, that one of the students gave me a pulpit, and it helps me greatly. And I'm able to stand here without being in as much pain. So I do appreciate that. But as we ended last week on conflict management, we talked about the 5 management modes of conflict. 2 of them really being non-management and 3 of them being management modes, but I just call them the 5 management modes. And let me briefly clarify what they are again without going in as much detail. If you need more detail, go back to week 1 and you'll be able to take notes on it. And you need to be taking notes on all this stuff because it will be on your final. Of these 5 modes, the first one is accommodating. And just briefly, accommodating is a non-management method which is defined as giving in for the sake of a relationship. A non-management method defined as giving in for the relationship. Before I forget to do this, let's pray. I just feel like we need to pray so that the Lord can help us have our minds open and receptive to His plan and purpose. Father, we love you tonight. We thank you for your grace and your goodness. I thank you for these men and women. I pray in the name of Jesus that you'll minister your grace to us. You'll teach us what we have need to know. And Lord, that you will accomplish your purpose in each one of us. Help us in this area of conflict management so that we can be more effective in touching lives, in ministering to people, and glorifying you through our lifestyle. So bless us, expand our understanding, give us wisdom, and help us, Lord, to walk out this process and this concept of managing conflict in a healthy way everywhere we go. So we thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. Let me go back even before I get to these 5 management modes and remind you of this concept that we're teaching a new paradigm of conflict management. It's not the concept of conflict either being good or bad, but it's conflict being an opportunity for growth and an opportunity to move forward and press forward and build relationships and deal with situations and build friendships. It's an opportunity for growth. And that being said, let me go over these management styles. The first one is accommodating. And accommodating is known as a non-management method defined as giving in for the sake of a relationship. The attitude here is, in order for you to win, I have to lose. So I'm going to accommodate your situation and give up all my marbles to make sure that you have yours. And there's little or no interest satisfaction for the accommodator. The second method is avoiding. And avoiding is another non-management method that's defined as taking one's self out of the conflict situation, ignoring it, refusing to acknowledge the conflict. And so I think many of us understand that. The third style is competing. This is confrontation or fighting to win. And the gist of this style is, we're not in this to test the waters, we're in this to make waves. Competing. The fourth style is compromising. And compromising could be defined as meeting others halfway. This is a way of sharing between conflict parties. Implied here is a degree of giving in, which under more favorable circumstances would be unacceptable. And this mode requires that in order for each of us to win something, each of us must also lose something. And the fifth style is that of collaboration or problem solving. And collaboration is a form of dispute resolution that emphasizes interest satisfaction over issues resolution. Philosophically and practically, collaboration encompasses the belief that the interests of one party will not be satisfied unless the interests of the other disputant are also satisfied. And one of the things I want to reiterate is that we talked about the fact that of all 5 of these conflict management modes, the most productive and the best overall is collaboration. If we can problem solve, if we can sit down and discuss what's the best in the situation and how to meet as many of your needs and as many of my needs as possible, and we collaborate it and problem solve and grow and develop relationships, that's the overall best management mode. However, if the other person will not collaborate, you're at a bypass and it's not going to work. So in reality, the most effective conflict management mode is the one that works in the situation. And which is the one that works in the situation? The one the other person understands and can work with. As an example, if the other person's a competitor and they understand nothing but competing, you have to get in their face and compete in order to come to some sort of resolution. And so, therefore, conflict management is a skill. It's a skill, number one, that starts with knowing your style of conflict management, what was sown into you and how you process and think to manage conflict. Number two, knowing the other person's mode of conflict resolution, talking to them a few minutes to find out what theirs is. And then number three, coming to a conclusion as to which style to use. And so, when is each style going to work the best? So how does one go about developing the skills to manage a specific conflict? If we need skills, how do we go about developing these skills? The first step, number one, is to understand these concepts of conflict management. And then number two, to develop social sensitivity to the sets of forces that are operating in any conflict situation. Number three, one should increase their ability or their skills to gain flexibility in utilizing the methods of conflict management. And finally, number four, one should begin to manage low threat level conflicts and then gradually experiment with high threat level conflicts. One of the problems is people like to start at the top instead of at the bottom. And that is never going to work. That's never going to work. Okay? So, that was just a brief review of these conflict management methods. Now, with that in place, let me ask you a question. If you were in class, I'd ask the question and I'd want some responses. What style did Jesus use? What style of conflict management? What was his style of conflict management? How did he approach conflict? There was a show years ago, a television show, when I was a young person, called Name That Tune. And contestants would come on the show, and what would happen is they would be given the first 3 or 4 notes of a song, and they were supposed to be able, in order to win, to name that tune. What song was the musician beginning to play? And so we're going to play a variation right now of Name That Tune. If we were in class, we could do it easily, called Name That Style. What style was Jesus using? And let me read to you in this first scenario, John chapter 11, verses 45 through 57. John chapter 11, 45 through 57. And as I'm reading it, try to determine which conflict management style was being used here. And here's what it says. Many of the Jews who had come to Mary and saw what Jesus had done, he had raised Lazarus from the dead, believed in him. But some told the Pharisees what Jesus had done. They convened a council, and they said, "What are we doing? For this man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, all men will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away our place in our nation." So from that day on, they planned together to kill him. So Jesus, now listen here, Jesus no longer continued to walk publicly among the Jews, but went away from there to the country near the wilderness. Jesus no longer continued to walk publicly among the Jews, but went away from there to the country near the wilderness. What style was he exercising? And the answer is avoidance. He was just going to avoid them. And he went away from there to another country. Listen to this second scenario found in Mark chapter 11, verses 15 through 18. Mark 11, 15 through 18. Jesus entered the temple and began to cast out those who entered the temple area and began to cast out those who were buying and selling in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. And he would not permit anyone to carry goods through the temple. And he began to teach them one of the primary principles of the Old Testament and say to them, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations'? But you have made it a robber's den." What form of conflict management was he engaging in when he was driving the money changers out of the temple? He was engaging in competition, the competitive style. He was going to compete with them and get them out of there. Listen to this third scenario in Luke chapter 20, verses 1 through 8. Luke chapter 20, verses 1 through 8. And when he was teaching in the temple, the chief priests and scribes confronted him. "On whose authority are you doing these things?" He replied, "Answer my question, and I in turn will answer yours. Was the baptism of John from heaven or from men?" And they reasoned among themselves, saying, "If we say from heaven, he's going to say, 'Why did you not believe him?' But if we say from men, all the people will stone us to death, for they were convinced that John was a prophet." So they said, "We don't know." And he said, "Then I won't tell you by whose authority I'm doing these things." What style did he use? Compromise. I'm going to compromise with you. You tell me and I'll tell you. Okay, since you're not telling me, I'm not going to tell you. Listen to the fourth scenario in Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 42. Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 42. You have quoted Exodus 21:24, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist to him who is evil. But whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, let him have your coat also. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks of you, and do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you. What style is he using? Give to him who asks of you, and do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you. He's using accommodation. Accommodation. And then the fifth scenario, John 8, 3 through 11. John 8, 3 through 11. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery and placed her in the middle. And they said, "Moses commanded such women be stoned. What do you say?" They were trying to trip him so they could accuse him, but he stooped down. And what did he write in the sand? He straightened up and said, "He who is without sin among you, let him be the first to throw a rock at her." Then he stooped down a second time to write in sand, and when he looked up, only the woman was there. Did no one condemn you? He asked. She replied, No one, Lord. And Jesus said to her, Neither do I condemn you. Go home and don't sin anymore. What style was he using? Collaboration. So you see that Jesus used all 5 styles. Why did he use all 5 styles? Because all 5 were his mode of operation? No, because he was dealing with different people that had different conflict modes, and the only way he could effectively engage them is by speaking their language, so to speak. Okay? So, that being said, I just wanted to help you process that and go over that again. Now, what I'm going to be doing, you're going to be receiving an email, and I'm sure you'll probably get it before you have this video. And I'm going to attach to that email a assessment tool and an assessment grading tool. It's called the Thomas Kilmann. And I want you to take that tool. In fact, let me get a copy of one here so you can see it, and it'll help you understand what I'm talking about here. On the one which is going to look like this as it starts, it has directions, and then it has some questions here. Okay, and what you're going to do with that is I want you to read the instructions and then do this assessment. It says, consider situations in which you find your wishes differing from those of another person. How do you usually respond to such situations? On the following pages are several pairs of statements describing possible behavioral responses. For each pair, please circle the A or B statement which is most characteristic of your behavior. Now, sometimes you're going to think, well, sometimes I do A and sometimes I do B. You have to just circle one, which describes, it's more characteristic of your behavior. Now, listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you here. Sometimes we have to operate differently at work than we do at home because we're hired to do a job at work that makes us manage conflict in a certain way that's not really the way we would manage it, but we're paid to manage it that way. So when you're taking this assessment, take it as though you're at home. Take it as though you're in your natural environment, that you're not forced to be a certain way. And circle A or B for each statement. It says, in many cases, neither the A nor the B statement may be typical of your behavior, but please select the response which you would be more likely to use. So you go ahead and you do that on the 30 questions. You circle A or B in each place. Then the next attachment to your email is a form that looks like this, okay? And that is a conflict management assessment mode. And what you do is then, as you can see, it's got 30 questions here. Just like there was 30 questions, this is the answer sheet. If you circled an A on question 1 on your assessment, on 1 here you circle A. If you had circled B on 1, you circle B here. You circle the A or B that corresponds to the question that you just answered. Then when you're through, you add up all of the ones on this line, all of the ones in this column, all of the ones in this column, all of the ones in this column, and all of the ones in this column. Put the totals down here, and that tells you how many times you acted in a way of competing, how many times collaborating, compromising, avoiding, and accommodating, to give you an idea as to how you manage conflict. Now, what I want you to do after you do that, I want everybody to do that this week, and after you do it, I want you to send me an email. And on that email, I want you to tell me what your scores were. In other words, I scored 15 in competing and 22 in accommodating, and whatever the case may be. because this is going to help you understand the way you tend to manage conflict. Okay? This is also part of your 5-page paper, if you remember on your syllabus. That 5-page paper, part of it is you're to explain the results of this assessment, whether you agree with it or don't agree with it, etc. So you need to do that assessment this week, and you need to send me an email letting me know what your conflict management assessment looked like. Okay? So be sure you do that this week. I'm going to move ahead a little bit here. And please, I want to reiterate what I said last week. In reality, you're getting more, even though the actual teaching time is less. You're getting more information by me doing it this way than me being in class, because we have so much interaction in class that we don't get to teach as much. When I just taped a little while ago the hermeneutics class, I was only 30 minutes into this week's class when I was already at the end of where we normally go through 2 weeks. So consequently, they're going to be getting more information in hermeneutics than they normally would. And the same thing is true here. Except what I'm going to do right now is going to slow us down a little bit, but I think it's important. I need you to get a piece of paper and a pencil. And we're going to take another little assessment right now. So get a blank piece of paper and a pen or pencil, and just put me on hold if you need to until you get it and you get back. But if you can get to it right quickly, do so. And we are going to take another little assessment. And this is an anger management assessment. Not a conflict management assessment, but an anger management assessment. And what we're going to do is we're going to evaluate our anger management, how we do with anger. And I have, how many questions? 25 questions. And they need to be answered 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. One indicates a relatively calm reaction to a situation, and 5 indicates a major eruption. So if I read something here and you would go off the deep end, if that happened, you need to put 5. If you would just have a relatively calm reaction, you would put 1. If you'd be somewhere in the middle, you're going to put 2, 3, or 4. So I just want you to, on your sheet of paper, mark down 25, make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 25, and then as I read each question, I'm not going to give a lot of time between them, so you're going to have to think fairly quickly and rate yourself 1 through 5, 1 being a very calm reaction, 5 being an explosive reaction in a given situation. So make sure you're marked, you got your 25, 1 through 25 written down there, and now as I say each one, put a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 as you rate yourself. So here's number 1. As you're about to leave home for an important appointment, you spill coffee on your clothing. As you're about to leave home for an important appointment, you spill coffee on your clothing. Would that be a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? Would you be calm, explosive, or somewhere in between? As you're about to leave home for an important appointment, you spill coffee on your clothing. Number 2. A car pulls out in front of you, causing you to slam on your brakes, and the other driver gestures at you as if you've done something wrong. A car pulls out in front of you, causing you to slam on your brakes, and the other driver gestures at you as if you've done something wrong. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Number 3. You miss a deadline at work because information to be supplied by someone else arrives late. You miss a deadline at work because information to be supplied by someone else arrives late. Number 4, a waiter or waitress gets your order all wrong and you're served a meal you don't want. A waiter or waitress gets your order all wrong and you're served a meal you don't want. Remember, you're doing 1 through 5. Number 5, friends arrive at your door unexpectedly, assuming that you're ready to entertain them. Friends arrive at your door unexpectedly, assuming that you're ready to entertain them. Number 6, you must wait an extremely long time at a medical or dental office. You must wait an extremely long time at a medical or dental office. Number 7, you drop a gallon of milk, spilling it all over the floor. You drop a gallon of milk, spilling it all over the floor. Number 8, you're driving behind a car going 10 miles an hour under the legal speed limit and there's no way you can pass. You're driving behind a car going 10 miles an hour under the legal speed limit and there's no way you can pass. Is it 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? Number 9, you get a ticket for parking illegally. You get a ticket for parking illegally. Number 10, someone makes fun of your new haircut. Someone makes fun of your new haircut. Number 11, at work, your boss in front of several of your colleagues criticizes a recent effort. At work, your boss in the front of several of your colleagues criticizes a recent effort. Number 12, at the last minute, a friend cancels out of plans you'd made for the evening. At the last minute, a friend cancels out of plans you'd made for the evening. Number 13, someone takes credit for work that you did. Someone takes credit for work that you did. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Number 14, you discover that someone is spreading gossip about you. You discover that someone is spreading gossip about you. Number 15, someone to whom you're speaking doesn't even pretend to be listening to you. Someone to whom you're speaking doesn't even pretend to be listening to you. Number 16, a friend borrows something of yours, a car, a book, a clothing, etc., and returns it damaged, though he or she makes no mention of its condition. A friend borrows something of yours and returns it damaged, though he or she makes no mention of its condition. Number 17, your judgment or intelligence is called into question. Your judgment or intelligence is called into question. Number 18, a pen breaks in the pocket of your favorite suit. A pen breaks in the pocket of your favorite suit. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Number 19, An expensive item of clothing returns from the cleaners with a large stain on it. An expensive item of clothing returns from the cleaners with a large stain on it. Number 20. Someone at work goes through your desk drawers without your permission. Someone at work goes through your desk drawers without your permission. Number 21. At the very last minute, you're asked to make a presentation at work on a subject with which you are mostly familiar. At the very last minute, you are asked to make a presentation at work on a subject with which you are mostly familiar. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Number 22. Your spouse or partner makes a major purchase without consulting you. Your spouse or partner makes a major purchase without consulting you. Number 23. Friends bring their toddler to your home and sit silently as the child wreaks havoc on your belongings. Friends bring their toddler to your home and sit silently as the child wreaks havoc on your belongings. Number 24. Despite your certainty, you are unable to convince your bank that they have made an error adversely affecting your balance. Despite your certainty, you are unable to convince your bank that they have made an error adversely affecting your balance. And number 25. A friend tells someone else personal information you reveal to them in confidence. A friend tells someone else personal information that you reveal to them in confidence. So you've answered all 25 of these on a scale of 1 through 5. Now what you need to do, add the numbers you wrote down. Like if you wrote down a 1, 3, a 4, a 5, and the different ones. Add up those 25 numbers that you wrote down, each number for each question. And then I'm going to, after you've added those up, you can pause me here and then you can add them up, and then when you come back on, I'm going to explain what your anger quotient here is. Okay? So if your score is 25 to 50, if your score ranges somewhere between 25 and 50, it means while there's probably always room for improvement, you remain admirably calm in the face of potentially vexing situations. You've learned that there are other options besides anger as reactions to change and sudden unpleasant developments. The rest of this session is going to help you refine your already praiseworthy ability to remain cool and in control. If your score was between 51 and 100, join the club, because this is where the majority of people taking this self-assessment will find themselves before learning the lessons that we're going to be talking about in regard to anger. Your ability to contain conflict and anger at generally manageable and non-destructive levels still needs work. You opt for anger more than you should. But if you scored between 101 and 125, you're literally in the process of killing yourself. Volcanic reactions like yours to life's difficult situations do all sorts of harm to your body and health. And it's probable that in the past you've jeopardized friendships and working relationships, if not lost them altogether. It's vital that you pay strict attention to the lessons in this session. And it's no overstatement to say that your life may very well depend upon it. Okay? Anger is a very destructive force. I could go over many, many different types of anger and situations that cause it. But let me just share some statistics to you from 1997, which is now close to 20 years ago. And so it's not gotten better. I guarantee you it's gotten worse. That there was one murder every 29 minutes. One rape committed every 2 minutes. This was, remember, 20 years ago. One robbery every minute. One aggravated assault every 31 seconds. One car stolen every 23 seconds. One violent crime every 19 seconds. One burglary every 13 seconds. And one property crime every 3 seconds. And that was 18 years ago. So we're going to talk about anger. What is anger all about? Listen to some quotes by some people in regard to anger. Martin Luther, the great reformist, from many years ago said this: "When I'm angry, I can write, pray, and preach well. For then my whole temperament is quickened, my understanding is sharpened, and all mundane vexations and temptations are gone." In other words, what he's saying is anger causes me to focus and to be sharp in what I'm doing. A writer, an author said, "You can use your anger constructively. In fact, you can become the master of your own anger. While anger is an inevitable part of your life, how you use it's up to you. If you learn to take full advantage of your anger, it can help you discover the deepest and most satisfying levels of meaning, both in relationship to others and to yourself." You see, many people take issue with the thought of making anger their ally. Here's another paradigm, another shift in thinking. We need to make anger our ally instead of our enemy. Many Christians are living with the mistaken belief that all anger is sinful, and they therefore conclude that we should ignore and avoid anger at all costs. But what exactly is anger? There's all kinds of definitions. Let me give you a few of them. Anger is a strong feeling of displeasure and belligerence aroused by a real or a supposed wrong. Doesn't even have to really be wrong. It can just be a supposed wrong. Anger is the general term for sudden violent displeasure accompanied by an impulse to retaliate. Another definition says anger is an emotional reaction of hostility that brings personal displeasure either to ourselves or to someone else. Anger could be hidden and held inward, or it could be expressed openly, but it's still anger. It can be of short duration, coming and going quickly, or it may persist for decades in the form of bitterness, resentment, and hatred. Anger openly displayed, deliberately hidden from others, or unconsciously expressed is at the root of many psychological, interpersonal, physical, and spiritual problems. Anger has been defined as a state of physical readiness or preparedness to act. But here's what you have to understand. Anger is a natural part of our biological makeup, just like breathing is. So is anger sinful? What does the Bible teach about anger? Anger is mentioned repeatedly throughout both the Old and New Testaments. There are almost 600 references to wrath or anger in the Old Testament alone. And there are some specific words translated as anger in the Bible. In the Old Testament, you find at least 3, and the first one is APH. APH, this is in the Old Testament. It describes anger as the flaring of the nostrils, the nose dilating, and the breathing becoming more intense. It gives specific emphasis to the emotional aspects of anger and wrath, and it's translated as anger 173 times in the Old Testament. The next Hebrew word is K-A-A-S. K-A-A-S, which means the stirring up or the provoking of the heart to a heated angry condition which leads to action. The stirring up or provoking of the heart to a heated, angry condition which leads to action. The third Hebrew word is chema. Chema, which means to get hot and to burn with anger. And then in the New Testament, let me give you 3 New Testament Greek words that are translated anger. One is orge. Orge, and it means wrath or anger as a state of mind, often with the purpose of revenge. It's a state of mind. I'm angry in my mind and I'm going to get revenge. Orge. The next one is thumos. Thumos. My allergies are acting up a little bit. I'm trying to see if we've got any Kleenex around here. I'm sure we do. I just can't see it. Thumos means turbulent emotion, boiling agitation, sudden explosion, and an outburst from inward indignation. And then the third one in the New Testament is parorgismos. Parorgismos. It means to be so angry that one is beside himself, one is out of his sound mind. And in examining these Greek and these Hebrew words, we can see that the Bible acknowledges that anger can sometimes be seen in a positive light as well as a negative one. We're going to look at 2 Old Testament examples from the life of Moses. In Numbers 16, Moses attempts to deal with rebellion against himself, against the Hebrew people. He identifies greed and ambition as the primary motivators of the rebels, and he becomes angry. And in Numbers 16:15 it says, "Then Moses became very angry and said to the Lord, 'Do not accept their offering.'" Not only does God not rebuke Moses for his anger, but God also becomes angry himself, only relenting from destroying the people because Moses pleads with him to spare them in verses 21 and 22. But yet just a few chapters later, we see Moses' anger addressed by God in a totally different manner. In Numbers 20, the people are complaining once again about a lack of water. Moses seeks God's guidance, and the Lord instructs him to speak to the rock in order to produce water. Instead, Moses disobeys God and strikes the rock in a fit of anger. And for this, Moses was not allowed to enter into the promised land with the rest of the people because he struck the rock. And from these and other passages, you can see that the obvious teaching regarding anger in the life of Moses is that anger itself is not wrong, nor is expressing anger wrong. It is the mode of expression that is important. And the New Testament handles anger in the same way. In fact, you see in Ephesians 4:26 and 27, a very interesting scripture, and I'm going to read it out of the Amplified. When angry, orge, that one Greek word, when angry, orge, do not sin. Do not ever let your wrath, parorgismos, your exasperation, your fury or indignation, last until the sun goes down. Leave no such room or foothold for the devil. Give no opportunity to him. So in other words, what that's saying is, when angry as a state of mind and wanting to get revenge with somebody, don't sin. Do not ever let your wrath, in other words, to be so angry that one's beside himself or out of his sound mind, Don't let it last until the sun goes down. Leave no such room or foothold to the devil. Give no opportunity to him. So it says here, doesn't say don't get angry. Instead, we're instructed when we do get angry, we must not sin. There's a definite difference between the emotion of anger and the sin of anger. The emotion of anger has been given to us by our Creator and is, in fact, modeled after His image. He's given us the capacity to respond appropriately to injustice, hurt, and injury. But the sin of anger, on the other hand, is focused on self, and it promotes the desire for revenge. It festers in our hearts and grows into bitterness. Sinful anger decides to mete out judgment on ourselves or on others, rather than leaving the situation in God's hands. Anger, in reality, is a God-given emotion. The Bible mentions God's anger several hundred times. God gets angry, and it mentions God's anger several hundred times. It is justifiable as a reflection of His intense displeasure at sin and human suffering. Because we're made in His image, we can also be angry at injustice committed against others or ourselves. And this so-called righteous anger, exhibited by God and Jesus, was indignation at unrighteousness. Anger is really a gift and a tool for wholeness if we define it as preparedness to act. Preparedness to act, and not as aggression. Anger is different than aggression. The emotion of anger can be expressed in many constructive ways. But aggression, on the other hand, is one learned and independent way of expressing anger. It's negative and destructive physical or verbal abuse. Bitterness, meanness, and ridicule are never acceptable responses. Aggression is inappropriate behavior, and it is sin. Anger is a part of God's nature. Given this fact, we cannot conclude that anger in itself is bad. God is completely good and holy, so we must conclude that divine wrath is also good. Therefore, God provides us with a model to study when we examine how He handled anger. Listen carefully to what I'm going to say to you right now. God's anger is consistent with His love and His mercy. The purpose of God's anger was to induce repentance, and it was motivated by hatred for the it was not motivated by hatred for the offender, but it was anger expressed under control. Handling anger effectively is the critical problem in Christian interpersonal relationships. Not expressing angry feelings can be just as harmful as venting and exploding at another person. Not expressing angry feelings can be just as harmful as venting and exploding at another person. Why? We all know why. You can hide it for a while, but sooner or later it's going to come out. And if it's been shoved down and shoved down and shoved down, when it comes out in full torrent. So now we can, let me read to you James 1, 19 through 20. Listen to James 1, 19 through 20. My dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. For man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. And then Galatians 5:22 and 23, part of it says, but the fruit of the Spirit is self-control, not being angry. So now we can draw some conclusions about the Bible's teaching on anger. We want to draw some conclusions about the Bible's teaching on anger. Number one, it is possible to be angry without sin, since anger is an emotion created by God for certain adaptive purposes. It's possible to be angry without sin. Number two, perpetuating anger and not dealing with it creates an opportunity for the devil to achieve gains. Perpetuating anger and not dealing with it creates opportunity for the devil to achieve gains. Number three, not all anger is sinless. Some human anger inhibits and retards God's righteousness from being displayed in our behavior. Number four, such sinful anger is irrational and pointless. It accomplishes nothing but strife and should be dealt with immediately by the application of the truth. Number five, self-control is the primary issue here rather than selfishness. And the Bible offers us some specific guidelines for handling anger. This is very interesting. I want you to be sure you mark these down. So specific guidelines for handling anger. First, avoid people given to anger. Avoid people given to anger. Proverbs 22:24 and 25. Proverbs 29:27. We're to avoid people given to anger. Why is this important? Because if we hang around those people, pretty soon we get angry ourselves. Here's another guideline. Put away anger, the violent, uncontrolled kind. Ephesians 4:31 and Colossians 3:8. So how can we put away anger? We simply choose to not operate in anger. We make a choice. You see, nobody can make you angry if you don't let them. But when you let them, you've made a choice to be angry. A third guideline here is be slow to anger. Be slow to anger. Proverbs 14:29, 15:18. 16:32. I mean, there's all kinds of references. I can't give all of them to you. James 1:19. Be slow to anger. Number four, don't provoke others to anger. Don't provoke others to anger. Proverbs 15:1 and 22. And there are other locations. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maintain proper control and confess anger truthfully. Maintain proper control and confess anger truthfully. Ephesians 4:15 and 25 and 26. Number 6, control your thoughts. Control your thoughts. Another way of saying that is you set the atmosphere around you. Don't let other people set the atmosphere around you. You set the atmosphere around you. Control your thoughts. Ephesians 4:23, Philippians 4:8, and 1 Peter 1:13. And then number 7, share your anger if it will help build a relationship and express the love of Christ. Share your anger if it will help build a relationship and express the love of Christ. Colossians 3:17 and 23 and Ephesians 4:15 and 16. So to summarize, the Bible teaches that it is permissible to be angry the way that God, Jesus, or the prophets were angry. But on the other hand, if we express anger through aggression or other unhealthy means, it becomes wrongfully destructive. So that's some good stuff. I mean, if we were in class, we could discuss this back and forth in a great way. But let's talk about now what triggers our anger, or where does it come from? Where does our anger come from? What triggers anger within us? And there are many potential causes. So let me share some of these potential causes with you. Number one, although rare, there are documented cases of anger stemming from purely biological reasons. In other words, there can be something going on in your body that causes anger. I remember a person that used to be in one of the churches I pastored, and he couldn't get along with anybody, and he'd blow up all the time, and then he'd come back and ask forgiveness, and it was a constant situation. And to make a long story short, his wife pressured him to go get checked out at the doctor, and he had a chemical imbalance, and when they gave him some medication to handle the chemical imbalance, he was a different person. And I could tell when he wasn't on his medication. Now, I'm not a person for medication, and I'm not advocating medication. I'm just saying sometimes people are angry, and it could be from a biological reason. And if nothing else, you at least need to get checked out so that you know how to pray and seek God, even if there's not medication to help you. So it could be, an anger trigger could be a biological reason. Number two, as we've seen, the source of God's anger is injustice. So injustice could be an anger trigger. Because we're made in God's image, we too should be angry at unjust situations. However, problems often occur here because our definition of injustice may differ from God's definition of injustice. We need to make sure that we're angry at what God's angry at, not just angry at things and saying God is angry at them. You see, the triggering mechanism in most of our anger is not another's sin against God, but rather someone's sin against us. Here's a third anger trigger. Anger can stem from a perceived threat to our personal worth. The first one is biological reasons. The second one is injustice. The third one is a perceived threat to our personal worth. Anger is often aroused when a person perceives that he or she is rejected, put down, ignored, humiliated, unjustly criticized, or otherwise threatened. And I want you to notice that our anger is based on our perceptions, not necessarily on reality. You know, if somebody perceives something to be true, it's true to them whether it's true or not. We feel threatened when our self-esteem or our self-worth is threatened. We become afraid of losing our self-esteem and our sense of worth. And fear is the primary emotion that triggers anger. Anger is merely a secondary emotion. In other words, it's an almost automatic reaction to the hurt or frustration that birthed that fear within us. The fourth anger trigger is when we believe our essential needs are not being met. When we believe our essential needs are not being met. All human beings share the primary needs of food, clothing, and shelter. And in addition, we all have a need to be loved, valued, and appreciated, as well as a need to have control of ourselves and our destinies. Beyond these, however, we each also have perceived individual needs that may differ from those of others. Listen carefully to this. Some people, for instance, have a great need for their physical surroundings to be neat and orderly. Others can live in the midst of chaos and not be disturbed at all. These personal needs are usually related to our individual temperaments and our personality types. It doesn't matter whether a need is common to all or specifically ours. If we believe it's not being met, we enter into the same pattern that we've already discussed. We have a perception, there's hurt and frustration, there's fear, and it turns to anger. Our anger rises up in response to our fear that no one recognizes or is concerned about our needs. A fifth anger trigger is a challenge to our strongly held convictions. A challenge to our strongly held convictions can prompt an anger reaction. Many of us who are trained to think in black and white terms hold so firmly to our beliefs that rigid dogmatism tends to set in. The more dogmatic we become, the more easily angered we are. And this is also related to the fact that anger can be learned. From anthropological research studies, we know that people from different cultures get angry over different issues. Both children and adults learn when to be angry from watching the behavior of others. Anger and violence are learned from modeling and reinforcement that's seen in movies and in television, where 80% of all programming depicts violence. So as we become to understand that we can rule our anger rather than be ruled by it, we'll gain the freedom to make anger our ally for constructive purposes in our lives. We have to get to the point that we own responsibility for our choices and our actions. The key to managing our anger is to own responsibility for it. Nobody can make me angry unless I allow them to. I am angry because I allowed this to happen. I am angry because I listened to that. Okay, we own responsibility. The choice is ours. As I've already said, contrary to popular opinion, no one and nothing can actually make us act out our anger sinfully. We all experience anger reactions to certain triggers, but how we respond is solely within our own control. Okay? Owning responsibility for our anger responses means that we can no longer hide behind such myths as, they made me do it, or I just can't help myself. With this in mind, I want us to examine the sequence of an anger episode in greater detail. What are the elements of an anger episode? We talked about triggers to anger. Now let's talk about, I think it's 4. See if I'm correct. Yeah, 4 elements of an anger episode. 4 elements of an anger episode. Every episode of anger begins with number 1, an environmental event. We have no personal control over the things that happen around us in our lives. Environmental events are caused by others and their choices, and are usually what we mistakenly think makes us angry. Things happen which violate our expectations. People act differently than we'd like them to. And as we've already discussed, we feel that someone has crossed our boundaries, violated our personal rights, not met our needs, or threatened our sense of worth. So it starts, number 1, with an environmental event, something that happens in our environment by someone else. And then each environmental event prompts, number 2, an internal monologue within us. So the second element of the anger episode is this internal monologue. We're constantly engaged in talking to ourselves in our minds, playing mental tapes to ourselves. And it's through this internal monologue or this self-talk that we formulate our opinions and the basis for our belief system. One gentleman by the name of Chris Thurman made this statement. He said, most of our unhappiness and emotional struggles are caused by the lies we tell ourselves. And the primary challenge is to make our mental tapes as truthful as we can so that we will be able to handle successfully whatever circumstances come our way, unquote. So the first element of the anger episode is an environmental event. The second is the internal monologue within us. The third element is the surfacing of feelings and emotions. The surfacing of feelings and emotions. Our anger reactions are a direct result of our self-talk and what we're choosing to believe about any given situation. And in his book, Anger is a Choice, Tim LaHaye says this, quote, many people live on an emotional level only. They are swayed, overpowered, and controlled by their emotions or feelings, unquote. And so our feelings and our emotions. The battle for our spiritual, emotional, and even to a large extent our physical well-being is fought in our minds. And the Apostle Paul speaks to this in 2 Corinthians 10, 3 through 5, when he says, for though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of this world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. We must learn that we make ourselves act out in sinful anger by telling ourselves untruths and lies invented and propagated by the enemy that comes through our feelings and our emotions as well as our minds. So let's examine a few examples of some helpful truths that we can speak to ourselves in anger-triggering situations. Listen to these truths. Nobody can actually make me unimportant or worthless, for I am worth everything to God. Therefore, I alone can make myself feel like a nothing by telling myself that the other person means to slight me and hurt me. Believing and reiterating that if the other person means to slight me, I must be insignificant, and acting out with intense, angry behavior in response to what I believe to be those slights, insults, and put-downs. But nobody can make me unimportant or worthless, for I am worth everything to God. Or how about this one? Even if it can be proven that another person ignored, hurt, or insulted me intentionally, I do not need to lose my cool, get overly upset, or rage unless I choose to do so. While I may feel anger when I discover that another person is trying to upset me, I definitely do not need to act out in a sinful way. Or how about this one? When I interpret another person's actions or choices, such as being late, buying something for themselves instead of for me, interrupting me, etc., and these actions or choices are commentaries on me, I am personalizing. And such personalizing interpretations are nearly always erroneous. People do what they do for their own reasons, and these seldom center on me. The problem with too many people with feelings and emotions is they think it's all about them, and you need to realize that to the other people it's all about them. Okay? And then the final stage in an anger episode, the fourth stage in the anger episode, is comprised of our actions. The choices we make about how we will respond to anger triggers are directly related to our internal monologue and our subsequent emotions. If we've believed lies, we will express our anger in a sinful, destructive manner. If we speak and accept the truth, we will choose a healthy way to release that anger. Okay? And we need to keep all of that in mind. Let me look here. There's still a number of things here on anger. I'm trying to see. I think we're going to stop there today, because I think you've probably had about as much information as you can handle at this point. And as I said last week, or even today, I think you're getting as much, if not more, than the other classes. So we're getting a bunch of information. So I need you to get back to me on your assessment and your, what your, as I said earlier, what your scores were on your anger management assessment. You need to email me that this week, and I'm looking forward to you doing that. So I trust you received quite a bit, and that we're making progress. And I'll look forward to being back with you next week. God bless you.